you. So my question is, I just want to follow up on that, you fall back on the advice. Are you aware that the Federal Chief Health Officer actually recommended against the mandating of vaccines?
Yes, at some point in time, yes.
So given that the Federal Chief Health Officer himself advised against the mandating of vaccines, why is it that you believe people should be forced to take a vaccine in terms of the greater good when it's not actually that's the case at all?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think our position, properly put, is that the onus should be on employers and businesses to make those decisions in the context of their obligations under the Fair Work Act and the Work Health and Safety Act themselves. That's within a broader context where there appears to be scientific consensus that vaccination is a good thing. Now, that is not to say that we think that vaccine mandates should apply all the time, everywhere, forever. That's a different question. But these bills are contemplating...
Sorry, I'll just cut you off there, sorry. So given that the vaccines aren't fit for purpose in the sense that they don't stop transmission and infection, we had over 10 million, or almost 10 million cases of COVID by August last year, 8 months after the country opened up, and we've had significant injuries for people of working age population. Do you think that employers should be able to mandate a vaccine if the vaccine's not fit for purpose?
Senator, I can't agree with you that the vaccines are unfit for purpose. The vaccines, as we understand the scientific evidence, are that they do provide use to the community at large and individualised protection.
Can I just, sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt again? I actually have the Pfizer non-clinical report with me, and it actually said that there was no difference in lung inflammation in the animal studies that they conducted after day 8 in the monkeys. They also said that they didn't test the distribution and degradation of the spike protein, and they engaged in a number of novel practices, i.e. new practices that had never been tested or used in humans before. So yet again, you keep saying that the vaccine was effective, and I keep saying, well, you had half the country catch COVID within 8 months of opening up. We've had more vaccine injuries. The rate of vaccine injury is higher than ever before. And we know that this study showed no increase in hemoglobin A in the mucosal system as opposed to the systemic system, whereby it stopped infection or transmission in the mucosal system. So what are you basing your statement that you believe that the vaccines are fit for purpose? What is the evidence for that statement?
As I've said, Senator, as we understand the scientific evidence to have come through this TGA and the evidence that was presented by the government over the course of the pandemic, the vaccines do provide some assistance to the community and to individuals for protection against serious disease and have some sort of collateral benefit, to preventing transmission in that regard. I'm not a scientist, Senator.
So you don't have any evidence yourself you can quote?
No, beyond the evidence that's publicly available from the TGA and from government
Well,
sources.
this is the evidence from the TGA, and their own document states that there was no difference in lung inflammation in the animal studies by day 8. So I'll leave that as a statement. And in regard to your statement that the community has an obligation to share the load in sharing risks around the community and not to necessarily put vulnerable people at risk, do you also accept that healthy people of working age population shouldn't be exposed to vaccine injury risk for the sake of older people who don't work, who don't come into contact with younger people of working healthy age population because they reside in aged care centres? Do you think that younger people should be exposed to the risk of vaccine injury to save others from COVID injury? I mean, who has the greater right here? The right of the person who could be susceptible to COVID, or the right of the person who has a risk of a vaccine injury because they were forced to take it?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. That's a good question, and it's a hard question, and it's context specific. So if the younger people worked in aged care, or if they worked in healthcare facilities, maybe even some educational facilities, certain circumstances, it makes sense that they
But that's only a very
risk
small.
vaccine injuries.
But that's only a very small population. If you actually stratify the COVID risk by age, it was mainly a risk of older people or people with comorbidities. These people aren't in the workforce. And today we're talking about the Fair Work Act that deals with employees, or meant to protect employees in the workplace. Now let's put aside the health settings, because we dispute whether or not the vaccine's effective. That's fine. But the fact of the matter is that by imposing a mandate on 100% of the working age population, we're exposing them to a risk that hasn't been properly qualified as per the product assessment report from the TGA, where they didn't test the long-term effects of the vaccine, they didn't test carcinogenity, they didn't test genotoxicity, they didn't test it on people with immunocompromised disorders, and we'll be speaking to the mother of a daughter who actually died, who had an immunocompromised disorder. So yet again, in regards to your statement that we all have an obligation to acknowledge the risks in the community, which risk is the greater risk? And given that a large percentage of the population are healthy and of working age population, why should the bulk of the population be exposed to a vaccine injury risk? And by the way, the Western Australian health report has just come out. Of the vaccine injuries reported in Western Australia, 47 of them went to EU, 47%, sorry, and 9% were admitted to hospital. So unlike the advice given by Professor Skerritt when he said most vaccine injuries are mild, it actually turns out over 50% of people who were injured by a vaccine, at least in Western Australia, actually had to go to hospital or stay in hospital.
Thank you, Senator. I understand what you're saying, and I don't accept that the majority of people in the majority of workplaces would require mandated vaccination. But when we talk about the risk of vaccine injury, we also need to consider the risks posed by long COVID. And there appears to be growing evidence that the burden of long COVID is significant. Now, again, we rely on data that we hear from scientific sources, but there are a number of sort of moving features, which is why, to go back to the responses that I gave to Senator Canavan, why we say that the onus should effectively be placed on businesses and employers to make those judgments in their own circumstances, and then be transparent about it with consumers.
Thank you, Senator Rennick.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chermside.